in the end, if we're going to side somewhere, it's compliance. Because if we're not verifying regulatory compliance, then we're not doing the job that we're saying we're supposed to do. We're not solving for the pain that is really the number one pain. But how does that get done differently with Buckler? First, most policies are not written in a way that contemplate the regulation. Most cybersecurity policies are not written in a way that contemplate SEC, FINRA, New York DFS regulation. They're not matched. And Buckler does that. If you have 3 to 4 different applicable regulatory agencies that govern you, usually that's a little much, but you could have 2, then Buckler matches those policies and creates a succinct one policy for the firm that satisfies all the regulations from those different regulators. And it does so very easily.
Well, hello there and welcome everyone to the Advisor's Edge podcast. I'm your host, Rob Jacomen, and I am joined by a very special guest. But at first, I want to introduce my co-host, Chad Ramberg, the one and only. Chad, how you doing today?
Very good. Glad to be here with a very old friend here, Scott. It's exciting to have you on.
Yeah, welcome, Scott.
Yes, thanks.
We have Scott Smith. He's the CEO of Buckler. And Scott, what I'm going to ask you to do is just kind of share a little bit about yourself, who you serve, and the problems you guys help to solve for your clients.
Great. By very old friend, I'm thinking Chad's saying that I've known him for a long time.
That's what I was thinking. I kind of stepped in it a little bit there. I'm sorry, Scott. You're so young at heart, you know.
I appreciate you, Chad, all the time. Great to be a part of this podcast with you guys and some of I love what Chad's been doing with Box and the work we've been doing together. So it's been a fun journey so far and love extending this here on the podcast. As you said, Scott Smith, CEO of Buckler. I'm my background an attorney, so did the traditional law school, practiced law for a little while, realized that very quickly I was not so good at trying to clean up messes as I want to be part of the group that was maybe making the mess, if you will, and seeing going forward instead of looking backward. And so quickly got involved in marketing and real estate title work where I was from in St. Louis, and I made a shift over to the securities firm probably 2008, or the security side of the business in 2008. I had that fortuitous golf outing with a group of guys who were running a securities firm, a small one at the time, in Denver, Colorado. And they had enticed me to go and get the Series 7 and 22 or whatever it was that I got, 63, 65. And I got all the licenses and started running a managing broker dealer out in Colorado. And so we were offering private placement securities. A lot of them were tax advantage, some oil and gas, mostly real estate. It was prior to the great financial recession. It was the early days of that industry, or that sub niche in the industry, which would be today what people would hear the DST business has really expanded and grown quite a bit. It's called a 1031 exchange. Back then it was tenant in common, different legal structure, but we would take in the clients, we would do the diligence, we would help them with legal counsel, then we go market the program and do road shows. And as a single guy, getting in this business, there was nothing better than that. We were, all making some money and having a lot of fun. And then you realize sometimes what goes up comes down, and the great financial crisis hits. By that time, I had met my beautiful wife. We now live here in Minnesota with 4 kids. Very busy time of the year, as we were talking offline in the summertime. But I was still fortunate when I landed to meet up with some folks at a company called FactRight that does third-party due diligence on those types of industry products and the sponsors that issue them. So I was early on the ground there, and I really had a great opportunity to get mentored by a couple of guys that had been around the block a number of times. One was my partner, who was a CFO. The other was a board member and also an investor in the company. So for 5 years, we built that business together. Today, if anybody knows that business, it's the company is one of the standard bearers for in the business it's in. I'm proud of that. But I coming out of that, I've taken away a lot of leadership, understanding, management, how to build and scale small businesses. And so more recently, I've joined up with Buckler. And I know we'll get into that in a second, but having a bunch of fun with the people, Vincent Guillot, who's our founder. We'll talk about him and the team. Great culture, fits me really well. And it's an interesting time. It's always interesting time in the financial service businesses. That's why I love it. It's never dull. It's always changing. Always.
Awesome.
Yeah. Yeah. I think you and I first met when you were with Fact Right there. And so it's been fun over the years as things go. I'm curious, what intrigued you? Do you have a quick question you want to jump on there, Rob? Yeah. What intrigued you about Buckler? I know you pretty well, and you think about something carefully before you go whole on into it. And clearly you found a key connection, something important there.
Right. Sometimes you think carefully and sometimes it's intuitive.
Okay.
Sometimes the fit's there and you don't think twice much about it. And that was more of the case here. I was working with another CISO cyber risk specialist who's here in the Twin Cities by the name of Paul Osterberg. Very great guy. I'm going to have a call with him a little later today. But he was using this platform called Buckler. And so I got more familiar with the SaaS platform. It was very intriguing from my background in the regulatory compliance space and where I know and where I think everybody knows cybersecurity is heading in all industries, but especially financial services. I thought this is the right time, right place. And it quickly became evident that it was the right people too. So Vincent Guillot, who's the founder, dynamic founder, these founders are all the same in two respects, it seems. First, they are consummate salesmen, very good at sales. Second, they are like Clydesdale horses, like thoroughbreds when it comes to work capacity. Their 10 hours is 30 hours of another person. And so for the last 3 years, Vincent and the team he's brought together, which is like a family, and in some cases it's truly like a family. It is his family.
Yeah.
But it is the family. I just stepped into it, right? Took a trip, met with a lot of them out in Vegas for a show last year. Got to sit down and talk with them, and it became very clear that it was an opportunity we both wanted to pursue, and I'm lucky to be a part of it.
That's cool. So you saw opportunity both of what's going on in the market, and then Vincent's a great guy. I got to hang out with him at FPA conference here recently.
Yeah.
And I think well, obviously Vincent better because you're working with him every day. But can you share with us a little bit? What was the insight? I know there's family working together, and it's an interesting story how Vincent found the concept of Buckler. It was, I think, it was kind of born out of a need. But can you kind of walk through that? Because one of the things. Look, here's the great thing is Rob loves, and I do too, the personal interest, you and I, but we also are here to help be a resource for the financial services. And so I want to hear about Buckler, the history there too. So the personal and the business history. So if you can back that up with what Vincent.
Yeah. So Buckler, Vincent and his team have all been part of startups in the past. So they've all come together to build and scale. This one was born out of some advisory work he was doing with what's called an MSSP, Managed Security and Services Provider. And they had a client who had a breach. Apparently the FBI showed up. Now, if the regulators show up, it's one thing. If the FBI shows up, it's a completely different thing.
Oh yeah. Scary.
Scary. And the FBI had asked, can we see the evidence that you had followed your cyber policies the way that you say you were going to in your policy? And they couldn't do it. And then, as founders tend to do, they look for off the shelf or anything in the market that could satisfy that need, solution to the pain. Didn't find it. So he built Buckler. He started typically as they do with spreadsheets, got a few people interested, went to version 1.0, which was very basic back in 2021, I believe. and then launched version 2 in March of last year. And we've been gaining some traction. It's in the financial services space, though, as you know really well, Chad. It's very you meet one advisor, you've met one advisor, and so how they operate is something new every time.
Yeah.
And cyber is really intricate and complex in a lot of ways, which we can get into in a little bit, but you really have to be able to craft a solution that's right. But this particular program does that. And so it was the right culture. And Vincent's just a great product guy.
Yeah. His technical skills are
it's just
outstanding.
A great product guy. Yeah. Just phenomenal.
Something that really stands out to me in what you just said, and part of it's because we recently recorded a podcast with an SEC attorney. Mm-hmm. And one of the things that he said, look, here's the thing. You can have a program, but if you have a program, or if you say you're doing this and you're not doing this, it's worse than not having a standard to work by. Mm-hmm. So, and you mentioned that's kind of what Buckler was born out of. So how does, it was born out of that. Now, how is Buckler helping to eliminate the problem where I've got a lot of clients where they say, hey, I'm working with this compliance firm or that compliance firm, and they've adopted their standard or their program. And how do you make sure that what they're doing is what they say they're doing, and vice versa? I mean, maybe not all of it. You can't tell this all, but high level, how does that concept work?
Yeah. So you look at a lot of compliance functions, because this comes down to a compliance function in the end. You're having to prove that you did something with the regulators. There's also the security side of the function too. And so we've said it kind of succinctly this way: you can be secure but not compliant. Mm-hmm. If you're compliant, it's likely you're secure for the majority of the types of firms that we're dealing with. So where we're seeing gaps is the work that the IT is doing and the language that IT speaks, and their proclivities, which is not necessarily in the vein of being compliant all the way. Now, there are certifications called SOC, which people have heard about, ISO, but that's a very different function than what we're talking about, which is compliance with regulation.
Yeah. Those
IT firms, especially the external ones, as we've been more and more in talking with firms, they don't, sometimes they're a little bit alligator arms. They don't want to participate in the recording or verification of what they've done to make sure compliance is satisfied. And compliance at the same time doesn't know much about IT.
Right. It's a hard thing to get your arms around.
It's a hard thing to understand. They don't know much about IT. IT doesn't know much about compliance. And that's the gap that we're seeing as we talk more and more to the market. Is we could have static policies that you can get from any compliance officer. But if they're sitting there collecting dust, as you said earlier, they're hurting you more than helping you, because you're not being able to verify compliance with those policies.
Yeah. So you're kind of threading that needle of verifying the compliance. You're checking the policy, you're checking what the firm is doing, and you're also I don't know, checking or verifying somehow the technical IT side of it. So you're not really, I mean, this is what's interesting. This is what I'm hearing. Mm-hmm. You're not really a compliance firm. You're not really an IT firm. How are you? What's it mean to thread that needle for you?
Yeah. In the end, if we're going to side somewhere, it's compliance, because if we're not verifying regulatory compliance, then we're not doing the job that we're saying we're supposed to do. We're not solving for the pain that is really the number one pain. But how does that get done differently with Buckler? First, most policies are not written in a way that contemplate the regulation. Most cybersecurity policies are not written in a way that contemplate SEC, FINRA, New York DFS regulation. They're not matched. And Buckler does that. If you have 3 to 4 different applicable regulatory agencies that govern you, usually that's a little much, but you could have 2, then Buckler matches those policies and creates a succinct one policy for the firm that satisfies all the regulations from those different regulators. And it does so very easily. We see a lot of policies that we review that just aren't written very well, or they're overcomplicated. The way we do it is typically we scrap a lot of those for our clients, and we build a very clean, easy to understand, easy to follow policy that is one-to-one matched up against all the regulations.
Okay, so you said scrapping, and you're cleaning stuff up.
We're cleaning it up,
making it easier to be compliant. Actually, is what it sounds like.
We're simplifying the policies so that you can execute the program. A lot of the policies are so messy, there's no way you can execute. When you see policies that say you may do this, or maybe in the future you want to do that, those aren't policies. Those are just, that doesn't work for what the SEC, New York DFS are starting to want more from you is less. They're recommending less, and they're prescribing more, right? Less about maybe you have some verification evidence. Now the burdens of verification is on you. All of that is changing as we enter into more and more of these, the cyber world that we live in. I mean, this is the year where we've had CrowdStrike. This is the year where we had United Healthcare, and it's interesting. And so beyond just regulatory, more and more clients are asking financial advisors, how are you protecting my data? Right. It's not just, it's a fiduciary issue as much as it is a regulatory one.
All right. Rob had to drop off for a minute. So we're just going to keep rolling through this here. And one of the things that gets interesting, we always like to talk about, because we all see a little bit different perspective of financial services industry. You guys are seeing a real interesting perspective with MSPs and various sizes of firms. What are you seeing out there as kind of the biggest challenges or problems or things that are coming up in your conversations with firms today?
Yeah. The first would be relative just to the regulatory world in general. And the New York DFS, which is really regulated to anybody who's selling insurance to New York residents. But we believe that it's the predecessor in some material ways to the way the SEC is building out its framework for its new cyber regime, which it's replaced and started to replace with the amendments to Reg SP that just were published a few weeks ago or a few months ago. But back to New York DFS, and I'll give you a direct answer. They asked covered entities, are you compliant today with the regulations? Which most of them were not, because the regulations were just passed. And if you're not, what exactly needs to be done to become compliant? And when do you expect those initiatives to be completed? So they really put the insurers on the record in a material way to in anticipation of enhanced enforcement around the new regulatory regime for New York DFS. I know the governor for New York has been very supportive and been very vocal about this is not going to be a dead letter. This is going to be an active, enforced regulatory regime. So that may or may not be what the SEC does in the long run, but it's the SEC is paying attention. So regulations are starting to become more prescriptive, more difficult to hide from. But since we're in this environment that really is a cyber compliance regime for the last 20 years or so, where the SEC has a lot of different risks alerts, different regulatory notifications, but they're ad hoc. It's not concise in a real way. There's a lot of recommendations to do this, recommendations to do that. The policies today that are written, as we talked about earlier, in a shoddy way, I'll say it just directly, won't satisfy the future regime and don't satisfy today if we're following the letter of the law, whatever the law is with the SEC and the regulatory world. So the biggest challenge that we're seeing is this inability to really show and operate a policy that is on cybersecurity, because the financial services firms, they haven't been regulated and enforced all that much in the past around cyber. That's all changing today.
Yeah. Well, and I imagine even with the CloudStrike in the last week or two, this is gonna publish a little bit later, but it's fairly fresh in our minds today. Absolutely. And
yes.
that must, from a regulatory standpoint, I'm sure we haven't seen what's the end of that train yet.
And even with the public companies, they have to file a notification with Edgar and SEC when they have a material incident regarding cyber. And that's been a very interesting game to watch, because this really wasn't a cyber attack, but it was cyber, and it had a material impact on a lot of these companies. I know it had an impact on us. We were in a hotel room over the week, and when it happened, nobody in this hotel room, Chad, had a key to access their rooms.
Oh my goodness!
The key system in the hotel was all driven through the Microsoft system, so nobody had a key. And so
fascinating.
It got really campy.
Yeah, talk about business interruption. I mean,
right?
That's the funny thing, is there's aspects of it, maybe, and this is how my mind works, which, good, bad, or indifferent. Sometimes a little glitch or a glitch of something like that can help us anticipate and fix something. So when the bigger challenges come up, we're more prepared. That's what I'm going to pray for with these challenges.
It's the silver lining from that one, because the likelihood that the next one or one of the next ones will be bigger in scope and scale is really high.
Yeah.
And this wasn't malicious that we know of.
Right. Yeah.
That we know of.
Yeah. Interesting. Well, one of the things that we like to talk about a lot around here is kind of being in a niche or niche market and helping develop and get really good at it. When we're talking about CloudStrike or something like that, that's definitely not. That's all over. And cyber is touching every part of our lives, every part of our business today. Mm-hmm. And then, of course, compliance, because we're in a highly regulatory environment. How did Buckler figure out, or how did you figure out, I want to focus on this niche and develop that? Can you share with me some insight there?
Yeah, Vincent would be much better to talk to about this as the founder, but it really did get born out of the need that a client had that had no solution that was readily available. Pain, it solves the problem. When you have a pain, when you have a headache, you reach for the aspirin, and you take the aspirin. You take it right away, and that is the pain that his client had. So now, he develops this niche, and it continues to expand in the financial services world. But what we're also noticing is a couple things with the system we have. The program is work. You can't just set it and forget it. There's work that needs to be done to actually execute on the program. And much of that's getting done in some areas of financial services. In other areas that are resource constrained, it's not getting done very well. We don't quite clearly know if the SEC is going to segregate between RIAs that are of a certain size and above and below, and how their cyber compliance should differ from one another. But if it's all going to be the same regime, everybody needs to follow the same rules. And it's going to be challenging for the smaller firms to get there. And that's true. For the larger firms, the ones that we're having more conversations with, they're cyber aware and they have some level of cybersecurity in place already. Mm-hmm. So their problem is our niche. They have no system by which the team can revert to and use and rely upon to record their work in an easy format so that it's producing the actual evidence that the cyber compliance is getting done. That's the real niche that we see the larger groups are having, 1 billion and plus.
Okay.
We're having these discussions of how do we, what more do we need to be to the people that are, and what more do they need to the advisors that are lower, that are smaller than that.
Okay, interesting. So right now you're really focusing on that niche, or Buckler as a whole is focusing on figuring out that regulatory structure. And it sounds like that's really going to be driven down, or we expect, maybe is the right way to say, that those compliance requirements are going to be driven down and or throughout the advisory environment.
Yeah, so the commissioners in the SEC actually made statements after Reg SP was amended, and it was very clear when they said, we tried Rule 10, which is a different proposal 2 years ago. It was a mess. I'm reading the tea leaves, and they didn't say that, but it was a mess. Now we have our act together, and this is the first step in the direction of a larger regime, if you will, a framework around cyber security and compliance, and we're going to expect more of that over the coming months and the coming year, no doubt.
Great. Well, not great, but what I say great for is I'm glad that we're here so we can have this conversation, and hopefully this is helpful for our clients and listeners to hear about. One thing, because it's fascinating to hear, especially with these large firms and MSOs and what have you, and what they're doing, and the insight into what we may see in the future. We appreciate that. But Buckler also did something cool in building, because one question I have gotten over the years, and I think this is one reason when you called me, I was like, we dug in fast with OpenVRM. Yeah. Tell me, just because right now that's a tool that was built, and basically what Buckler seems to be doing is sharing that hard work that's been done as a benefit for the industry. But tell me, what is OpenVRM and how does that work?
Yeah. So Open Vendor Risk Management is the acronym, VRM.
Okay.
Huge problem for the industry. Every financial service provider or advisor needs to do level of due diligence on their vendors, including cyber. And those vendors are required to follow the same protocols that the advisors have to follow from the SEC. So we've powered OpenVRM using Buckler. All of the SEC's vendor risk management policies are in OpenVRM and accessible for free. The whole system's for free for advisors. We currently have, I think, 1,070, last time I checked, vendors that are in the system at various levels. We're gathering momentum in terms of more and more each month, as you'd expect. But we believe it's a service that's a very highly administrative service that can be done more easily if there's a simple, standardized, centralized location for these firms to execute. And the vendors do the work for you. You just review the information and you use the system to cut out all of the sending 25 or 30 questionnaires by email, let's say,
right.
As an advisor would probably have to do. I don't know how many, that's a lot of vendors for a lot of advisors, but nonetheless, it's a lot of time, and there's time savings here. It is, as is across all of the Buckler system. We save a bunch of time for a lot of our clients.
Yeah. So I want to pivot a little bit, because saving time, when you bring up compliance and saving time, they usually don't go hand in hand.
No,
right?
No.
and any good business owner and founder is really looking to grow the business, and so you're seeing a lot of the firms you're working with helping save time so they can grow and develop. How are you seeing them shift those resources once they found a solution like OpenVRM, or they're getting things cleaned up and simplified with Buckler? What's some cool things you're seeing happen out there?
Yeah. Well, with some of the clients who we're talking to that have IT solutions in place, for instance, a lot of times they're actually developing their own internal systems
Mhm.
some software that they've developed internally for use by their clients or otherwise. And this administrative work just doesn't take precedent for those folks.
Right.
So they're having to switch gears, and they're having to switch mentalities away from that more revenue generating work toward, if they don't have Buckler, toward this administrative work that just has no ROI to it. It needs to be done. It's regulatory related, but it doesn't have revenue generation attached to it. So we're unlocking a lot of that time for those IT specialists in particular.
Okay.
Because the IT specialists, whether they're CISOs or VP of IT, those are typically the ones that are driving the system.
Mhm.
The compliance might have the term CISO related to them, but that is in name only.
Yeah. And so CISO, yeah, sorry, we're having slight audio challenges. I think we'll be able to clean that up in post. But CISO, because the first time I heard that, I was like, okay, I've heard it before, but what is a CISO? What is it?
Yeah, CISO is just termed Chief Information Security Officer. And the New York DFS requires you now to name one. So somebody in your firm who's employed by the firm has the title CISO if you're following the New York DFS rules. That's a daunting task. Most people in the organization would rather not have that title, right? Because most people don't have the level of information security expertise to feel comfortable with it. And maybe they're not supported all that well by others in the organization. But that term, Chief Investment Security Officer, is becoming more applied by regulations as time goes on. And so what we say to our Buckler users is, you are, in effect, whoever's running the Buckler system, if they're running it properly, in effect is delivering CISO functionality to almost all of these firms at the level at which the SEC expects it. And so if you can't feel comfortable with your current process or your current team and you're the CISO, then that's the part at which, the time at which you want to raise your hand and start talking to Buckler.
Right. Or even, yeah, if you're the CISO and you need to coordinate all that, or if you're a 800 million, 1.5 billion firm, and maybe you don't have a formal CISO, but you need to fill those roles and get it more consistent with what regulatory, and essentially be ready as those potential regulatory requirements come to play. You guys are going to help keep that informed, is what I'm hearing from you. Well, yeah, that's good. That's one reason I like it, is from a risk management standpoint, you're helping reduce that risk in the long run, because goodness sakes, we don't want a cyber claim, and we certainly want to keep, if there is a minor cyber bump, we want to keep it away from a fiduciary fiduciary claim. For sure. So well, thank you for taking the time. We like to, before we get to the end, make sure we keep the human interest side of things. And a couple of things is this week I was talking with an advisor. He's 15 years younger than me, and his dad has a practice, and they're looking at how things are going to develop. So if you could go back and think of, tell your 20 years ago self what you would want to know when you're thinking about in this industry, development, improvement, what would be that nugget of wisdom that would help you do better as you're growing and developing?
Well, I have a saying now that I use pretty frequently, that youth is wasted on the young. Totally is. So I would say, for me personally, my own personal journey is one where I'm having to wake up all the time to knowing that I can't do it alone. There's always been a very strong independent streak in me that has would serve me well in some environments, but over the long run, does not serve you well, serves you poorly. And so, in fact, right, by the time I had reached that level at that organization, I realized your network is your net worth, and you really do have to lean and partner with others. And we're doing that now, right, Chad, with Box and Buckler. But that's for those that, whether or not it's true, like to see themselves as high performers, and the scoreboard counts, if you will.
Yep.
Doing it with a team is so much better and so much more rewarding, and puts a lot more points on the board than trying to go at it all alone. So ask for help as much as possible, and don't be afraid to look foolish and silly in doing that. That if I sat down my 20-year-old, that's exactly what I would say to him.
That's cool. That's great.
Yeah.
Well, thank you for being so open and honest. That's a tough and an honest answer. That's cool. I like it.
That's me. That's you. Like I said, you get to the other side of that midlife stuff, Chad. And why hold back anymore, right?
Right. No, this is one of those things we love about and I think culturally, Buckler and Box is we are who we are. We're up front. We're doing our best. We're working together to do the best we can for our clients and growing the conversation, which is why the podcast is here too. All right.
Yeah.
I'm one more question. So forgive me for that, but I want to know, when you look back, at the end, I mean, for you and I, the cool thing about the work we do, we're not the old guys yet in the industry. Mm-hmm. We're not the youngest ones. We're somewhere in the middle, which means we get hopefully a few more decades of good times. But when you get there at the end and you're sitting on the beach, or you're in your rocking chair and you're looking back over your life and, oh, wow, this is so great because this is what people see me as. What does that look like for you?
Good timing for that question. First, my first answer is I want my kids to always want to come back home as frequently as possible, right? So I want that. What they say about you, I think, is once you have children, it feels like success is defined by what your kids say about you when you're not in the room, right? But professionally, it was brought home to me last night. So we had my father-in-law over for dinner. We were having some wine out in the porch after we ate. And he just retired, a couple of years ago, as an orthopedic surgeon, highly successful, built a huge practice with a bunch of different orthos. But he has a physician's assistant who was stellar. So whenever he had a surgery, even a couple weeks in advance, Tom was the name. Tom would come to my father-in-law and say, I think we need this, this, and that for next Thursday. My father-in-law was saying, I'm not even thinking about next Thursday, but it was set. It was ready. And they built that together over 30 years. They built that cadence and that workflow together. Well, Tom's still working. My father-in-law's retired, but Tom loves working with the young orthopedics in the practice because he gets to show them the system and how they built it, how John and Tom built it over 30 years. And him and I agreed, you feel like that's your legacy, right? That something you did materially is being used for the benefit of other younger people in the industry. And it's like a Bill Belichick, Bill Walsh tree of football NFL coaches effect, that the system, while it's different a little bit here and there, it's still kind of the same, one of the same main themes of the system that you built. That would be the thing that if I look back and I thought I had some success, I would be able to see that with some clarity with younger people that are utilizing some of the learnings that I had through my career.
Yeah, that means touching a lot of lives, helping a lot of people do some really great things. Yeah.
That's right.
Well, that's the beauty of it. We can help business owners do better. And we'll keep working towards that. And I got to say, Scott, thank you so much for taking time out of your busy day and teaming up with Buckler. It's gonna, you guys are doing some great things and helping out a lot in the industry, and I'm looking forward to the next few years, how that continues to develop, because to me, it looks like you're just at the beginning here, even though you've been working on it for a few years.
Yes, sir. Chad, I've enjoyed all of it. I'm watching your progress too at Box with just enjoying every part of your success with you and your team, and we're doing it together, and we're having fun doing it as well. So thanks for having me on.
You're welcome. Fantastic. Have a great weekend. We'll talk to you later.
Okay, bye now.
Thanks. Bye.